The fluorescent lights of County General Hospital's trauma unit cast harsh shadows across the faces of the assembled medical team. Dr. Patricia Osborne, the hospital's chief of surgery and a woman not given to displays of emotion, stood with her arms crossed, her expression grim as she looked at the patient in room 317. Victoria Ashford lay unconscious, her face and arms covered in severe burns, her vitals dangerously unstable. The CEO of Ashford Technologies, a biomedical firm worth billions, had been caught in a laboratory fire 3 days ago. Despite the best efforts of County General's burn unit, her condition was deteriorating. "We've tried every conventional treatment," Dr. Osborne said to the assembled team of residents and specialists. "Skin grafts aren't taking. The infection is spreading. Her immune system is compromised from the trauma. At this point, we're looking at multiple organ failure within 48 hours. A young resident raised her hand hesitantly. "What about the experimental treatment, the one that the regenerative cell therapy protocol?" Dr. Osborne cut her off. "It's still in trials. We don't have FDA approval for use in humans. The liability alone, but Miss Ashford's own company developed it," another doctor interjected. "Ironically, she was overseeing that very research when the fire broke out." Dr. Osborne shook her head. "Without proper testing, without approval, we could be sued into oblivion. The hospital can't take that risk." In the hallway outside room 317, a man in navy blue scrubs pushed a cleaning cart, methodically working his way through the corridor. At 36, James Richardson was invisible to most of the hospital staff, just another janitor, easily overlooked, rarely noticed. But James noticed everything. He'd been working at County General for 6 years, taking the night shift so he could be home during the day with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. His wife, Sarah, had died from aggressive melanoma 4 years ago, a death that had come far too quickly and left James with both a broken heart and a fierce determination to make sure Lily never felt abandoned. The janitorial work didn't pay well, but it was honest, and it let him be the father Lily needed. He'd put his PhD in biochemistry on hold indefinitely if there simply wasn't time or money to finish while raising a child alone. As James emptied the trash bins outside room 317, he couldn't help but overhear the doctor's conversation. When they mentioned the regenerative cell therapy, his hand stilled on the trash bag. He knew that research. He'd read about it in the medical journals he still subscribed to, the ones he read after Lily went to bed, when he let himself remember the career he'd left behind. More than that, he'd done his own research on similar compounds during his graduate work. He'd never published, never pursued it after Sarah got sick. But he knew the theory cold, and he knew something the doctors might not. Ashford Technologies had recently published preliminary data showing the treatment was actually more stable than their initial trials suggested. James finished his round and went to the janitor's closet on the 4th floor, the one that doubled as his unofficial office. He pulled out his worn laptop and accessed the hospital's medical database using the limited credentials his position allowed. He shouldn't be doing this. It was a violation of patient privacy. But James had learned during Sarah's illness that sometimes the rules had to bend for the right reasons. Victoria Ashford's file was extensive. The burns covered 30% of her body. Infection was widespread. Her prognosis was grave. Dr. Osborne had been diplomatic with the team, but the notes were blunt. Without intervention, Victoria had perhaps 24 hours left. James sat back, his mind racing. The regenerative cell therapy could work. He was almost certain of it. But the doctors wouldn't use it because of liability, regulations, the cautious slow-moving machinery of hospital administration. And Victoria Ashford would die because everyone was following the rules. James thought of Sarah, of how many times he'd wished for someone to break the rules, to try something unconventional, to fight harder for her life. No one had, and he'd lost her. He made a decision that would either save a life or destroy his own. Over the next 6 hours, James did things that terrified him. Using his janitorial access to the keys and badges that led him into nearly every part of the hospital, he made his way to the research laboratories in the basement. Ashford Technologies maintained a small research suite at County General, part of their partnership agreement. James had cleaned those labs for years. He knew where things were kept. The regenerative cell therapy was locked in a temperature-controlled storage unit. James stood in front of it for a full minute, his heart pounding, knowing that taking it was theft, that using it without authorization was potentially criminal. But Victoria Ashford was dying, and he could help her. James took one vial, just one. He prepared a dosing protocol based on his recollection of the published research and his own calculations. Then, at 3 a.m. when the trauma unit was at its quietest, he slipped into room 317. Victoria lay unconscious, machines breathing for her, monitoring her failing systems. James looked at her fascia, what he could see beneath the bandages, and saw Sarah. Saw every patient who died because the system moved too slowly, because caution won out over courage. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know I don't have the right to do this, but I can't watch you die when there might be something that helps." He administered the treatment intravenously, carefully following the protocol he'd prepared. Then he adjusted her foredrip to mask what he'd done, cleaned up any trace of his presence, and left. James barely slept that day. He went through the motions of caring for Lilia, making breakfast, helping with homework, taking her to the park, while his mind churned with anxiety about what he'd done. He'd committed theft. He'd administered an unapproved treatment without consent. If Victoria died, he could be charged with manslaughter. If she lived but suffered complications, the lawsuit would destroy him. But if she lived and recovered. That night, James returned to work with dread coiling in his stomach. He did his rounds, pushing his cart through familiar corridors, waiting for security to arrest him, for someone to notice what he'd done. Instead, at 2 a.m., he heard commotion coming from the trauma unit. "Dr. Osborne, you need to see this." James edged closer, his heart pounding. "Her vitals have stabilized. The infection markers are down significantly. And look at these, the burn tissue is showing signs of regeneration. Real regeneration, not just healing. It's like nothing I have ever seen." Dr. Osborne's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That's impossible. Nothing we gave her should produce these results. Run the blood work again. Check everything." Over the next 48 hours, Victoria Ashford's recovery became the talk of the hospital. The burns that should have taken months to heal were regenerating at an unprecedented rate. The infection disappeared. Her organ function normalized. It was, everyone agreed, a miracle. James watched from the shadows, torn between relief and terror. Victoria was going to live. But soon, someone would figure out what had caused the miraculous recovery. And they knew James Richardson. He turned to find Dr. Osborne standing in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "Can you come with me, please?" His legs felt numb as he followed her to a private office. Inside, Victoria Ashford sat in a wheelchair, her face and arms still bandaged but her eyes alert and focused. "Miss Ashford insisted on being here," Dr. Osborne said. "James, we ran extensive blood work trying to understand Victoria's recovery, and we found traces of a compound that shouldn't be there, a compound that matches the regenerative cell therapy from our research labs, the same labs that are showing one vial missing from secure storage." James couldn't speak. This was it, the end of everything. "We checked the security footage," Dr. Osborne continued, "and we saw you entering the research suite. We saw you in Victoria's room at 3 a.m. 3 days ago." "I can explain," James started, but his voice broke. "Please do," Victoria said. Her voice was weak but clear. "Because according to Dr. Osborne, what you did either saved my life or should have killed me. I'd very much like to know why you did it." James took a shaky breath. "I have had a PhD candidacy in biochemistry. I left the program when my wife got sick. She died 4 years ago. I couldn't afford to keep studying and raise my daughter alone, so I took this job, night shift, so I could be home during the day." He looked at Victoria directly. "I've been following your company's research for years. I read the journals. I saw the data. When I heard the doctors saying they couldn't use the treatment because of regulations and liability, I couldn't watch you die. Note when there was something that might work. My wife died because everyone followed the rules, because nobody was willing to take a risk. And I've regretted every day that I didn't fight harder for her, that I didn't demand they try something, anything." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I broke laws and hospital policies. I know I could have killed you. But I also knew that doing nothing would definitely kill you, and I couldn't live with that choice again." The room was silent for a long moment. "You gave me an unapproved treatment without my consent," Victoria said slowly. You stole from my company's research labs. You violated virtually every medical ethics principle in existence. Yes, James whispered. And you saved my life. Victoria turned to Dr. Osborne. Patricia, what's the protocol here? Dr. Osborne looked conflicted. Technically, we should report this to the medical board, to the police, Toa, but if we do that, Victoria interrupted, we destroy the man who saved my life. The man who took an enormous personal risk because he saw someone dying and knew he could help. She looked at James. Tell me about your research, the work you left behind. Still shaking, James explained his graduate work, research into cellular regeneration that paralleled but differed from Victoria's company's approach. And you've kept current with the field, while working as a janitor. I read everything I can. I still subscribe to the journals, still follow the research. I thought maybe, someday, if Lily gets older and I can afford to go back. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Dr. Osborne, I'm not pressing charges. What James did was unorthodox and technically illegal, but he saved my life. I'm not going to punish that. Relief flooded through James, making his knees weak. However, Victoria continued, I do have a condition. James, you're wasting your talent cleaning floors. I want you to come work for Ashford Technologies. Research position, full benefits, salary commensurate with your experience and education. We'll even help you finish your PhD if you want. Your understanding of the regenerative therapy is clearly beyond what most of my team has demonstrated. James stared at her. You. What? I'm offering you a job. A real one. Using that brain you've been hiding behind a mop for 6 years. I can't. I have my daughter. I need to be home during the day. I need flexibility. I will work around your schedule. Bring Lily to the lab if you need to. We have excellent on-site childcare. James, you saved my life by refusing to accept the conventional answer. That's exactly the kind of thinking my company needs. But I'm a janitor. I don't have connections. Or you're a biochemist who's been masquerading as a janitor, Victoria corrected. And more importantly, you're someone who cares more about doing what's right than what's safe. That's rare. That's valuable. Dr. Osborne added, for what it's worth, I'm not reporting this incident. What you did was reckless and completely inappropriate. It also showed more genuine medical judgment than half my residents demonstrate. You saw a treatment that could work, calculated the risks, and made a decision. That's what good doctors know. They take calculated risks to save lives. You just did it from a very unorthodox position. 6 months later, James Richardson sat in a research laboratory at Ashford Technologies, analyzing data for the next phase of regenerative cell therapy trials. His nameplate read Dr. James Richardson, PhD candidate, and his workstation had photos of Lily making silly faces at the camera. The transition hadn't been easy. He'd had to learn to navigate office politics, to present research to executives, to inhabit a professional world he'd left behind years ago. But Victoria had been true to her word. The schedule was flexible, the support was real, and his work mattered. Victoria herself had made a full recovery, her burns healing with minimal scarring, her story becoming legendary in medical circles. She'd testified before the FDA about the effectiveness of the regenerative therapy, accelerating its approval process, and she'd become a friend and not just an employer, but someone who understood what it meant to be given a second chance. James, Victoria appeared in his lab doorway. Do you have a minute? Of course. She sat down, studying him with the intense focus that had made her a successful CEO. I've been thinking about that night when you gave me the treatment. Do you regret it? James considered the question. I regret that I didn't have the authority to do it properly. I regret the fear and uncertainty I caused. But do I regret saving your life? Never. You know, most people wouldn't have done what you did. They would have followed the rules, even if it meant watching someone die. Maybe. But I'd already watched someone die because everyone followed the rules. I couldn't do it again. Victoria nodded slowly. Your wife would be proud of you, of the father you've been to Lily, of the scientist you've become again. I hope so. James looked at the photo of Sarah he kept on his desk, her smile bright, her eyes full of life, taken before the cancer. I think she'd like that something good came from losing her, that her death taught me to fight harder for other people's lives. It wasn't just her death, Victoria said gently. "It was your love for her. The depth of that love is what made you refuse to accept my death as inevitable." She stood to leave, then paused. "By the way, the board approved your proposal for the Sarah Richardson Memorial Fellowship. Starting next year, we'll be funding research positions for people who've had to leave their scientific careers due to family obligations, single parents, caregivers, anyone who had to choose between their work and their loved ones. We're going to help them come back." James felt tears sting his eyes. "Thank you." "That means everything, thank you," Victoria corrected, "for seeing me as a person worth saving rather than a lawsuit waiting to happen, for remembering that medicine is about courage as much as caution, and for showing me that the people we overlook are the janitors, the night shift workers, the ones without impressive titles sometimes have the most to offer." Years later, when Victoria Ashford told the story of her miraculous recovery, she always included the full truth, not just about the experimental treatment or the rapid healing, but about the janitor who'd risked everything to save her life. "James Richardson taught me something crucial," she'd say in interviews, at conferences, in the book she eventually wrote about the experience. "He taught me that real innovation comes from people who care more about solving problems than about protecting themselves. That sometimes the most important breakthroughs happen when someone refuses to accept that death is inevitable." She'd pause, then add, "We spend so much time in healthcare and research worrying about liability, regulations, proper channels. And those things matter. They protect patients, they ensure safety. But sometimes, in our caution, we forget that the goal isn't to follow the rules perfectly. The goal is to save lives." James never forgot that, and because he had the courage to act when everyone else was paralyzed by protocol, "I'm alive today." James would usually add, "I don't recommend that anyone replicate what I did. I got incredibly lucky. But I do think we need to examine why someone had to break the rules to try a treatment that could save a life. We need systems that allow for more innovation, more flexibility, more trust in the judgment of people who actually understand the science." And Lily, now grown and studying medicine herself, would finish the story. "My dad taught me that job titles don't determine worth, that you can be a janitor and still be a scientist, that cleaning floors at night to provide for your family is just as noble as running a company or doing research. He showed me that love makes people brave. Love for my mom, love for me, love for a stranger who was dying, and that bravery changes the world." The regenerative cell therapy that saved Victoria's life eventually received full FDA approval. It went on to help thousands of burn victims, trauma patients, people who'd been told their injuries were too severe to heal properly. And every vial carried a small notation, added at Victoria's insistence, developed by Ashford Technologies. First successful human application, Dr. James Richardson. Because sometimes the most important medical breakthroughs don't happen in operating rooms or research labs. Sometimes they happen in the middle of the night, administered by someone who refuses to let another person die when there's even the slimmest chance of life. Sometimes they happen because someone loves deeply enough to risk everything. Sometimes they happen because a janitor remembers he's also a scientist. And sometimes the difference between death and miraculous recovery is simply someone who cares enough to try. Even we, especially when everyone else has given up.